Only a couple months now. I think I recognize her.
Welcome to the Truth in This Art Beyond. We're in Philadelphia, and I am your host, Rob Lee. And today, I'm going to share an interview I did with a printmaker and owner of Philadelphia Printworks. Through her work, she amplifies marginalized voices and empowers communities of color. This interview will delve into her journey as an artist and entrepreneur. I don't know if artist is the term that she'd use, but I think there's some artistic sensibilities there. And the challenges that she's faced, as well as the impact that she hopes to make through her work. So please welcome my guest in this interview. Get ready for Maryam Pugh.
Hello, hello.
Thank you for meeting here. We're in lovely Philadelphia. We have the fumes of a Super Bowl coming soon, or the big game, as they say, because marketing. Mm-hmm. But thank you for making the time. Thank you for coming through. And I want to start off also super fashionable too. Mm. When you said you were wearing that, I was like, hold on.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
So can you tell us a bit about your background and like how it influenced the work that you're engaging in today? And I think in particular, like, you know, experiences related to social justice. And I say that question because I think I always look for the origin story, like what's connected there. And I was sharing a little bit of mine in my 30-minute unedited pre-podcast talk that, you know, it's in high school or even further back. So for you, what were some of those like early experiences that kind of got your interest in what you're doing today?
Yeah, well, I didn't really have an origin story, so I'm sorry. I just want to like not have a build up to that because that's not what's going to happen. But I will tell you a little bit about my background, and I think just the sum of all those things made me into the person that I am now, and made me interested in pursuing the field that I decided to pursue. Sure. So I grew up outside of Philadelphia in a small town called Coatesville, Pennsylvania. It's in the suburbs. It's about 45 minutes away. I grew up on a farm. My mother is Christian, or was Christian, and my father was Muslim. So I had that kind of, I guess, dichotomy, which kind of led me to be more open-minded about religion and just a lot of different things. Me living on a farm, other people did not live on a farm. So it's not like, you know, everyone was going to school kind of talking about what they, you know, did in the fields that day, or, you know, as a farmhand. It was something that definitely kind of made me different from the people around me. And so I kind of grew up having to get very comfortable with being different. Yeah. Let's see. After high school, I went to college at Cheney University. So that also is not too far from Coatesville, Pennsylvania. And it's a HBCU, a local HBCU here. And I studied computer science there. Learned a lot just about myself. Prior to that, most of the schools that I went to were predominantly white, you know, schools. So kind of going to Cheney was really great it was just a really great growing experience for me.
Sure.
And then once I graduated, I thought I was going to like travel the world and everything and, you know, like figure out what I wanted to do. But I discovered that I was pregnant with my son Milo. And so that kind of changed my trajectory. I decided to move to Philly because that's where Milo's father, his support network, is from. And I've been there ever since. I've been here for 20 years now.
Oh, wow.
But again, it's really not that far from Coatesville. And mostly because after I got here, I started to kind of like dabble into the creative community here, and I just found it to be so welcoming and friendly. And Philadelphia being like halfway between New York and DC and, you know, Baltimore, it just makes it a very strategically placed to be able to get to both of those cities with no problem. So Philly's the kind of city that really grows on you, you know, kind of gets under your skin a little bit. So many people I know have moved away from here and then come back. And it definitely has a special place in my heart. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up here. And I think like having all those kind of different experiences as I grew up and evolved into who I am now definitely informed my decision to be in something that I guess is social justice related.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's see, it's like you had the questions beforehand. I like how you're going through the process. I like that. And I read in doing my internet stalking research.
Appreciate it.
That you're a big reader as well, right?
Right.
So what sorts of books were you into like growing up? And I asked that. I had a interview recently, and I was talking with the guest, and they own a bookstore, and they were like, one of the things that is black-owned bookstore, and one of the things he had mentioned was that, you know, his dad would tell him like, yeah, you learn about these white people like all week. He's like, Monday you're reading about black people. It's no TV, none of that. Just this is what it is. So that informed some of the direction as to why he has this bookstore and some of the things that are baked into that bookstore. So what sorts of like books were you reading, and do you think they have any like impact on like kind of like what you're interested in these days?
Absolutely, 100%. Where I grew up, there was a library, a public library, about 10 minutes walk away. And I used to walk there and pick out books, and I found myself gravitating towards books by like Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston. So those were my first like definitive, I guess, authors that would go on to kind of form who I would become as a person, and kind of like plant some of those ideas around like, I guess, black feminism to some extent. And then my father, he's a big reader, a voracious reader, and I would say that he is the type of person that has like mountains of books just around the house, and I've always tried to do the same thing so that one day my child would pick up those books without, like, he was never like, you have to read this book, but just being surrounded by it makes you familiar with those titles, and it makes you kind of want to read that stuff. So definitely owe part of that to my father. And then also I wanted to read the stuff that they were talking about in school, and I felt like I wasn't being, like, I didn't want to be left out of certain conversations. And so I read a lot of, like, I guess stuff, like I said, I did go to a primarily white, lower education schools. Sure. And so there they were reading things like, Charles Dickens and right, things that were not necessarily like black authors, but they were reading like The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, so it was fun to read those things, but I primarily started doing it because I wanted to be involved in the conversations they were having, and I felt like I wasn't prepared if I did not read those things, so I wanted to have like some kind of like, participation and engagement in that. So that's kind of how I started out as a child. And then once I went to Cheney, the HBCU, for college, there were just rooms full of books. Like you would go into the lounge and there would be like all these books up there. And I'd say that's probably when I started getting more into like James Baldwin and, Audre Lorde and people like that, kind of reading more about theory and things like that.
Thank you. So, talk about a little bit of seeing your background, that you'd have the corporate job in there, and I'm having this sort of thought process right now in my real life and kind of making that leap. So talk about sort of that decision to kind of leave that sort of field and move into something that's more passion oriented and kind of going out, on your own and trying to kind of switching gears, if you will.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit more background, I've been doing Philadelphia Printworks for I think 11 years now. It's something that I started as a side hustle, quote unquote, and I at that time fully planned to keep my full-time job. I felt like I could do both things at the same time, and I felt like it could supplement my income in a really healthy way. I would say about 4 years ago, so about 2 years before the pandemic ended, or started, I decided that I did want to start doing this full-time, running Philadelphia Printworks full-time. And I was in the computer field as a software engineer, test engineer, and it was a big decision because I was making a good amount of money, and I did have a dependent, and you don't want to step out unless you know that you're ready to do it. So that's why that's why I grew the business alongside of, my full-time job for as long as I could until I got to the point where it felt like, oh, maybe this can actually support me.
Yeah.
And at that point, about 4 years ago, I stepped out on faith, and decided to start doing it full-time. And I did in the beginning take a bit of a pay cut. It was an adjustment, but I felt like there was less of a ceiling, by being an entrepreneur. And I had a track record of building that base, so it wasn't like I was just kind of stepping out on something that hadn't been proven. And where I was working, I felt like I was living that kind of double consciousness they talk about, where I would go into this, software company, and I didn't feel like I could be my full and authentic self all the time. And like people in the cafeteria would be talking about why they were voting for Trump. And I just didn't want to hear that anymore. Like, I think I was going through a phase where I just really wanted to be intentional about curating my life, and I felt like I was in a position to be able to do that, even if it meant maybe making less money, at the time. I also at that time was seeing people, like my manager had been there for 25 years and he was let go. So this idea of like some kind of security in a corporate job, and right now we're seeing a lot of the tech field laying people off, like there's just been rolling layoffs across a lot of different industries, and most recently the tech field is one of those industries. And so I just think that we have this false sense of security when it comes to corporate jobs that does not necessarily exist. So for all those reasons, I decided to like just kind of start doing Philadelphia Printworks full time, and I'm so happy I did. Like, I really love it.
So more to come on that. I want to comment on that real quick. In sort of the same spot where you realize where you're at and kind of building this, and it's these things that every now and again it's this poke. I don't have the kind of dual consciousness thing. I have the sometimes if I'm like, I had my backpack with my gear in it, right? But there was one time I was leaving. I had gym bag, gear, like I had maybe like a suit or something to wear for an after pod engagement. And then I was like, I have 4 costumes with me right now. I was like, this is not something I can maintain, or even like last Thursday, literally a week ago, just running from 7 to 7, just doing everything non-work related, by the way, just trying to make it happen. And it's like, all right, I'm always tweaking. Like you mentioned the sort of strategy component there. I think about those things a lot, how I'm going to go about this, but it's like the configuration of what I want doesn't quite match what the situation is. And I'll throw this out there, I think, in multiple fields. Like, I'm kind of around tech. It's like, oh, you're data, so you're this. And I feel like there's a consistent almost pissing contest between employee and employer. And it's like, how terrible can we be right now? And it's like, I fall for it on occasion. I've said this before, and it's ridiculous, but it's actually funny. I have this person that I work with, and you can see the finessing, and I'm like, I can't finesse. You can see the finessing. Like, we're in the office 3 days a week. Right. And somehow they're not in the office at all. And I'm like, I want to be able to not be in the office so I can go to Philly and do podcasts. And I remember I was talking with my boss, and I was like, how about we replace her with a SQL script? She's like, you are stupid. I was like, man, ChatGPT exists. She was just like, stop.
Dang, that's AI.
I was like, that's essentially what it is. She's like, that Capricorn energy is heavy.
Savage.
So, going back, as I try to be not completely petty, talk about Philadelphia Printworks a little bit, PPW. Talk about the mission and what sparked that interest in ultimately what the mission is. I guess start off with what the mission is and have bullet points after that.
Yeah, sure. So the mission of Philadelphia Printworks, which is a kind of social justice heritage brand, is to amplify marginalized voices. Basically, we use T-shirts and apparel as a medium to be able to do that. And our main goals are to amplify, advocate, and fundraise for marginalized communities. So that's the goal.
See, I like it. It's like you read it before. It's like
I've done this
you may have said it before. I remember I have a buddy who was talking about, we were in this like sort of conversation with some people that were eavesdropping in a conversation that we were having. And they were like, you guys are podcasters, aren't you? Because of the back and forth. And they were like, so what's the podcast about? My boy's like, yeah, you know, we be talking about stuff. And I was like, don't. I was like, can you work on your pitch? I was like, you've actually lost us listeners by saying this.
Elevator pitch. Yeah, stay ready. So you don't gotta get ready.
So, what sparked that interest in like really going out there and saying, I'm going to put a lot of my time, energy, and, you know, faith, if you will, into pursuing Philadelphia Printworks. You know, like, I can always track why I started this. Trump pissed me off talking about Baltimore. Oh, that's what it was.
That was a direct attack. You talked about Philly too, but yeah, I feel you.
I got reminded of that too. I was like, all right, that's my update. Y'all get it, you know? I grew my beard out too. Right? So what was the motivation and the sort of spark the interest?
Yeah, so when I started Philadelphia Printworks, really, I started at the time with Ruth, Paloma, Perez, and we kind of met being in similar circles in the creative community in Philadelphia. We used that energy to create something that we felt like represented what we were interested in doing. And after 1 to 2 years, Ruth and I parted ways, and I continued to do Philadelphia Printworks on my own. So just want to make sure I'm giving that shout out to my co-founder. Yeah. And really, at the time, we both had our own reasons, and I had been wanting to start a business before we actually had the, wherewithal to do it. I thought about doing it for years before I took the first step. And in the beginning, it feels like it's never going to happen, and people are like, oh, what about that thing you've been talking about doing? How's that thing going? And you have all these doubts in your own mind that you have to work through. But really, I wanted something creative. I've always wanted to work for myself, or be kind of just have that autonomy over my life. And I wanted to do something that could impact my community. And I felt like t-shirts were something that were very low risk in terms of starting a business, but could also check off the rest of those, things that I was interested in doing at the time. So that's where the idea of starting a t-shirt company that was focused on social justice issues kind of came from. And my interest in social justice, I just feel like I don't know how you cannot be interested in it. Even if you don't make it your mission in life school, and sometimes I even wonder if that was a mistake on my part, but even if you don't focus a lot of energy on it, we're always aware of it, and by we, I mean Black and people of color, or anyone who's in an othered group. You're always aware of being made to feel other. So I just don't like feeling that way. I want what I was promised, I guess I was raised to believe in, the quote unquote equality for all that this country promised, and therefore I want this country to be better. I want it to do better.
I hear you. It's important. You don't want to feel other. And I think, when we're being unique, when we're being ourselves, there's all of these instances where I'm going to be other, but not to that sort of really broad degree, because there's something else added to it. When we are, I guess, looked at sort of in this country, it's just oh, you're other because of this. It's no. I'd rather just be myself versus you guys are bucketing me in this way, and I didn't ascribe by that. I didn't agree to that. None of this is what I wanted.
Yeah, being unique is definitely one thing, and having our own culture and things that make us, who we are is definitely important. I'm not advocating for some kind of assimilation, and that's not what I think you're saying, but just to drive home the point that really it comes down to resources, or laws that are put in place in a way that make people feel like they're not being represented and given a fair shake the way everyone else is.
Thank you. No, that's great. So I want to say, I remember, because it was happening in live and in person, this sort of faux, I'll call it faux, because that's me. I'll call it this sort of faux, really public consciousness, quote unquote. I want to say probably, let's say 2020, George Floyd, on past, where brands are starting to be more conscious and more woke and more aware. And otherwise, they're kind of dubious. You know, it's just like, nah, you gotta got a track record. It's like, don't go through and start redacting episodes of Golden Girls. Y'all had blackface in the episode here, or whatever the thing is, right? And I'd rather, you know, some of these things have sort of the disclaimer there versus, because then it just infringes on, you know, we can just control, we can curate what the experience is, curate what history is. And that's just where my mind goes. But this question has very little to relate to all of that, but as in some context.
No, I believe there's a thread there.
So could you speak on the importance of like getting the message right? Because there's a lot of times where these brands, you know, they will put out something that, you know, you guys are doing it right, but, you know, putting out there sort of the right message, because these folks, they'll put out something that says, what was it? It was one that, what is it? Maybe it was American Apparel? It was something really weird about like the wildest monkey in the room or something. I was like, why is there a black kid in this ad? It was maybe that or the Gap.
Or like H&M or something.
And it's like, you guys have done this more than one time. Like, can we...
You're trolling us.
Like, what's happening here? And then some that try to do this thing that feels woke, that feels like, all right, the intent was there, but you didn't have any black people in the room when you came to that sort of decision. So from your vantage point, speak on the sort of importance of kind of getting the message right and how, like, what sort of work goes into that.
What was the last part?
Like, what sort of work goes into getting that message right? Like, is it, you know, having people in various like disciplines and backgrounds being a part of sort of conversation?
Yes, 100%. One of the things that we typically say, or I typically say, is that if you are not one of the people who are directly impacted by something that you're speaking on, then you should pass the mic, you know, to them. So you essentially have a platform, and you're giving other people an opportunity to use that platform to speak out of their firsthand account. Kind of tying that back to this kind of movement where companies were becoming more... I don't even know that they were becoming more woke. I just think that it became urgent for them to make some kind of statement about race, you know, or racism, and because of public pressure, you know. And that whole time was very surreal as a black business owner, because we saw this like tsunami of sudden support from the rest of the country who doesn't typically have to think about these types of things. And it kind of made me feel like, wow, this is what it feels like to be supported. Like if the country or more people had empathy, like, wow, just imagine how much we could get done, you know, with those types of resources. So seeing that happen in real time was like definitely a roller coaster. And then now, a couple years after, seeing that energy kind of like fall away is also very disheartening. You know, like, it's just really sad, and it goes to show how not truly invested people were in being an ally or a conspirator, and that they were kind of just doing it because they had to score some kind of marketing plus points so they wouldn't get canceled, I guess, essentially. So I think that what businesses can do is continue to try to work on their like DEI efforts, and I say that rolling my eyes.
Or is it Jedi this week? Or
yeah, I don't know, but because like I'm speaking from a place where my lens informs everything that I do. So a lot of like non-POC people don't necessarily know where to even start or begin, and they're, I guess, what they need to do really, and what they can do, is listen to the people that are kind of telling them what is authentic to the Black experience or to other experiences that might be outside their own, and then actually like trust that there is a culture or there is another way of doing things that might not be the status quo, but that could still have an impact and be profitable, you know, because at the end of the day, they care most about profits, unfortunately.
Yeah, when someone's saying they're beating up Negroes like hotcakes, you know, always making Chappelle references, but it's like you got to trust folks when they're saying that this is what the experience is, this is what the story is. And the other thing, I'll make this comparison, maybe it works, but it's like when you're making measurements, right? Measure twice, cut once. It's like, if you're not familiar with it, it's like, maybe you should listen twice and then kind of act or try to be in once. And, you know, I remember some of the things locally in Baltimore where, you know, different protests, different sort of this response to things. There were certain folks who don't look like you and I that wanted to be the lead and the face of these things. I was like, no.
Yeah.
And I remember NFL. I remember some of the things that they have a history, recent history of doing, but it's like, oh, suddenly, oh, your highest paid players are all black. And they're quarterbacks, so faces of franchises. So to your point, I think there's something that has to be done to, yeah, we're backing them, we support them, but then the message starts to change. Instead of on the back of the helmets, Black Lives Matter or what have you, it turns into choose love, something that's a little bit more sanitized.
Palatable, yes.
Yeah. And I think there's something in going back to it with the thread, right? When you trim out something gets lost in that message, and then that becomes what it is.
Yeah.
And it's about cultural preservation, and that's where I'm kind of shifting a lot of my, I think, what I'm doing in this podcast, kind of getting something at a moment in time.
100%. I also think that sometimes I'm very insulated, you know, now that I've walked away from, you know, being in those rooms where I was the only black person working in the software field to being able to kind of curate who I surround myself with. I feel, and even being here in Philly, because Philly has such a, like, strong organizing and movement building history, I think that sometimes I'm a bit insulated from what's going on in the rest of the country, you know, and there are places like this, what is it, like there's like these holds of very strong religious groups, which kind of like are bringing the conversation back in the other direction, you know, and they're the ones who are pushing a lot of, along with, you know, different Republican parties, and I'm not being exactly articulate about this because I can't think of the name of the group, evangelical Christians.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I do believe that's like a current, you know, under the kind of base of who America is and has been, and I think that they have a very strong stronghold on who they want America to be. And I think sometimes, like, that's what we're fighting against. So having that kind of, like, middle of the road messaging sometimes helps, like, people who are all the way on the other side to kind of, like, move towards the middle. And then even, like, with older generations of African Americans, like, we're typically a conservative group, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so even, like, sometimes getting them on board, like, they don't always like the messages that Philadelphia Printworks puts out. Even though sometimes I don't even see the work that I'm doing as like radical or whatever, I just see it as speaking to the black gaze rather than the white gaze, you know? So I'm centering myself rather than making it about, like, constantly thinking about like defining myself or explaining myself to someone who doesn't have the context of what I'm talking about. Right. And that in itself is scary for a lot of people.
As you might find this very interesting based on what you were saying there, being a person that worked in a Catholic institution for a while, and the moment that I spoke about diversity, somehow my contract wasn't extended. Yeah.
But they're all like, DEI, diversity, please tell us what you feel, until you tell us something to make us uncomfortable.
It was ironic because I was in a diversity meeting with the new diversity person doing a listening tour.
I'm so sorry.
And it's this vibe where in there you have a few white women in it who, oh yeah, we're in this sort of same. It's like, it's not the same. It's like, I'm the only black male here in this meeting, and they're gaslighting me live and in person. And it's just like, oh, but I think it was one of those, that experience, it was one of those things where I was like, oh no, I see what this is. I don't need to be here. So it was kind of one of those things. It was like a race. It's like my contract wasn't extended, but also I had my letter of resignation in hand.
Right.
Because it just didn't fit, for me anymore. But yeah, having those sort of people who have these sort of conservative ideals or what have you, like when you look back at certain things in history, we like to look back like 30, like we were around 30 years ago, you know what I mean? It's like we were kids, but we were around 30 years ago. And when people mention certain things like, yeah, this was a law that was enacted during this time that impacted like black folk. I was like, yeah, but a lot of black folk voted for it. Like, what are you saying? Super predator conversation,
Yeah.
So moving back as the inner Capricorn comes out. So talk about that process of discovering sort of like screen printing. People ask me about this, right? How'd you get into podcasting? I was like, I don't know. I like radio. And I was like, how do I record people, with their consent, right? And so for screen printing, how did you because I tried and I failed. How did you get into it?
Yeah, I love screen printing. Like just you mentioning it made my face light up,
I saw that.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something, like I said, I'm a person who loves to work with my hands. I'm a very tactile being, and coming from a computer field where everything was so abstract and logical, it was really nice to have something that I could do and then look at and be like, I did that. That exists. That's real. That's in life. That is out here in the world. And so learning how to screen print, I had never done it before I started this business. I don't necessarily have an art background.
Right.
And like I said, I went to school for computer science. And so me and Ruth, we just started asking around. We watched a ton of YouTube videos, a lot of DIY, learning how to do it yourself. We built, so for screen printing, there's a certain amount of equipment that you need at a base level, and it's not as expensive as some art forms, but it can be cost prohibitive. So we built our own light box, whatever we could DIY we did. And then beyond that, just learning the art and craft, we would speak to other screen printers in the city, and they were always willing to share whatever information and knowledge that they had. And I don't know, Philly's a really great city for that, because as soon as you tell somebody that you're doing, there's just so much opportunity to do things on your own. There's so much space to be the one to have that poetry night or to, start that t-shirt company. Yeah. As soon as you tell somebody you're doing something, they're like, how can we collaborate? What are we going to work on together? So that feeling that love, I think, helped to keep us going and to keep me going, and I still feel that love and that kind of collaboration and community.
That's great. It's beautiful. It's one of the things that I've noticed in coming up here for the last 4 or 5 months at this point. It's like, oh yeah, that's cool, bro. Keep it rocking. You need anything? It's like, cool. Why do you have pretzels? What are we doing? Where do these pretzels come from? And no, that's really great. And some of those things you start out with, and I look for, it's this conversation around sort of, there's so many things that are digital that require a computer, but when you get to a spot where you're able to do something that's analog, I like to try to find a way to make these things analog. So this is obviously, it has this recording setup or what have you. This is my Rode setup. Okay. But I like to be able to add this sort of, there's still tech here, but it's still being there next to a person in real life versus, hey, let's hop on a Zoom and talk through it. There's something that gets lost. It can still be great, but there's something that's lost there, or maybe when it's in person, there's something that's gained. But there's this other sort of dynamic where when you have the notepad, I pulled out my Hokusai notepad or what have you, I like to keep that with me, because when I'm writing something now, I want to have the imperfections. I want to have that sort of analog thing where if I go into my notes app in the phone, I can write down an idea, but I might be inclined to delete it. Now I have the thinking that was there that I may have scratched out. It may still be something there in that idea, even though that I intended to remove it. It's why did I write that right in there? No, that's another idea that's coming from it. It's like a tree, it's a chain or something. So I think having sort of digital and analog being a part of it, and this is low cost. Yeah, I could use something different than a MacBook, but this is sort of low cost for entry, and it doesn't have sort of those sometimes colored barriers that can be there. And I think that's why, like, you look at social media, right? When Instagram started shifting away from images,
Okay.
images was like a low cost way to kind of get in. You can have really good gear, but for you to start off, you can have an okay camera.
Right.
And then it's like, oh yeah, let's go with video.
Yeah.
And then, you know, to produce a decent video, you kind of need certain pieces of gear. Some people need lighting, for sake of argument. I've talked to people who do video, and it's like, yo, bro, do I need lighting? Because that's going to be a different price.
Yes, it is.
So as an entrepreneur, what was something that you always envisioned for yourself? Like, and, you know, and challenges, you know, surprises, things of that nature. But what is something you've always envisioned for yourself as an entrepreneur? Maybe something that's coming forth, maybe something that you've already experienced. You're like, that happened the way that I was hoping it did.
Yeah. Well, like I had mentioned earlier, I have always seen myself being my own like boss and being a business owner. And I think really the reason for that is because I always wanted to lead something. Like I always felt like I had the capacity for leadership, and I didn't feel like I was being given those opportunities. Or even like this idea of meritocracy, you know, like I worked hard to be given those opportunities, but even at the software company that I worked for, like there was the employees were very diverse, but the upper management was not. You know, like they all were typically 90% white men. Yeah. So, I guess I really just always saw myself being able to kind of lead my own ship, steer my own ship in a way, and I have been given that opportunity with Philadelphia Printworks. For the past, so once I decided to leave the software field and start doing this full time, I did start building out my own print shop. I've had different iterations of print shops along the way, but this is one that I was like, all right, I'm doing this full time. Okay, we got a studio in West Philly, and we started building it out. And along with that, I started building out kind of a staff, and I was very scared about it at first. You know, I had a lot of trepidation, and I like hired one person, one printer, and I was like, all right, let's see how this goes. And it's kind of like the idea of being a goldfish in a, you know, like in a bowl. Yeah. Like the bigger space that you have, the bigger you can grow, you know. And so I found that having someone else to help actually allowed us to grow in a way that was like manageable, you know, and healthy for what we needed at the time. And then fast forward to, I guess, about around the time of the George Floyd protest, we were given this like crazy influx of orders and cash, and it was kind of just like an injection of funding. And so I was able to like really build out my team at that time, and I was very intentional about making a space that reflected the ideals, you know, and values that I stand for, and made sure everyone was paid like above minimum wage and a fair and equitable amount, and then also like healthcare and things of that nature. And I was really, really excited to be able to do that. But then, you know, and I was the leader, you know, I was like doing all the things that leaders are supposed to do. But I just realized that I couldn't keep up with it, you know, like it was very demanding, like having to always be the one with the answers, you know, like there was a certain amount of burnout and exhaustion that came along with that. So just from an entrepreneur's perspective, I discovered that I don't want to be that kind of leader. I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to have to deal with the day-to-day operations of running a print shop, you know, specifically, even though that was a large part of Philadelphia Printworks' like business model for a long time. I realized that I kind of had to go back to my original mission, which was amplifying marginalized voices, and I could do that without necessarily having to have a print shop. You know, it was nice to be able to create a space, and it was beautiful for what it was when it was, but I'm kind of in a new chapter now, and I think my initial feelings of wanting to be a leader, and that being one of the reasons that I kind of like became a small business owner, I don't really feel that need as much anymore.
Yes, it's finding like what the next stage looks like of what you're doing, and you know, I've touched on it, and people always give me that look of shock and awe when I say like in 2022 I put out 300 podcasts, and I'm like, how? It's like, because I'm a crazy person and I'm obsessed with the thing that I do, and so on. But also, I like the way you described the goldfish sort of scenario there. You know, trying to build out what that team might look like, because what's going to be required of me to do this. It may be less of behind the scenes. It might be more going to places and getting those interviews and, that sort of 2-hour commitment to do an interview. It now, if I'm going up to, let's say, Philly, if I'm going down to a different state, that configuration is a lot different. It's like an hour and change coming up, hour and change going back. And if I'm doing 2 interviews like I'm doing today, that's a whole different setup. Then I could sit there at the studio, knock out 4 interviews, and still have time for lunch.
Right.
And it's like, all right, finding someone that kind of connects with the values that I have, gets what I'm trying to do, and then it's just like adding value. I think that when it comes to like leadership, when you're dealing with leadership, which I used to get told this a lot by an ex-boss. Okay. When you're dealing with data, when anything that I was like, I never knew enough. When you're dealing with this, it was always one of these weird ageist sort of things. But I'll say, I think there are 2 sorts of leaders. Generally speaking, you have, people who are how people, and you have why people. Okay. And I think why is always connected to sort of that mission. It's like, well, this is why I want to do this. So have you help me figure out some of the how. I have ideas on the how, but help me figure out the how. But I know why we're doing it. I know why we're doing this podcast. I know why we're doing this sort of facilitated storytelling, how we're going to put it out, and so on. I think a team needs to be a part of that to kind of help fill in some of those sort of time gaps and some of those knowledge gaps. Because if you're out here trying to save the world with the message, you can't do it all.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
So this is the last real question I have for you.
Okay.
And everything else is BS. Someone told me that the rapid fire are BS questions. I was like, look, you're trolling me.
Right.
So I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. So, like, how does a city, in this case Philadelphia, how does it grow while maintaining its culture, while preserving that sort of culture? And like, how do you define the culture here?
I don't know.
In the frame of sort of arts and what you do, you touched on it a few times? Because I like to, really
I need
bring that in.
Perimeters. The type of person is like, this question.
Computer science background.
Hurting my brain.
Had to think about it.
So many different angles I could approach this from.
From the food culture standpoint,
Right. I guess like from the art side of things, like many major cities, Philadelphia is seeing a lot of gentrification, and typically it's the artists who find these like homes that aren't as expensive and move in and change the culture of the neighborhood, and then other people with more money move in and then they totally like obliterate the culture that was there before. I think that the responsibility is to communicate and listen, and we actually have a shirt. This is my shameless plug for a shirt called Good Neighbor. We have a shirt, Respect the Locals. We've kind of like talked about gentrification a little bit, these themes, and really the idea is about educating yourself if you're someone moving into these neighborhoods, about what kind of developers are in these neighborhoods, who's working there, what is the developer's track history, do they care about the people that are there, and do they care about displacement? Like, you are not a passive observer. You have to be engaged. You have to do the work. You have to educate yourself, and mostly like just make sure that you listen, which has been a kind of a common theme. Every place has a culture before you got there, and so just making sure that you're paying respect to the culture that was there before you arrived, so that culture can maintain itself long after you're gone.
Well said.
Thank you.
All right, now it's time to get weird. After all of that good and impactful, and I feel like this has gone well.
Totally.
Like I'm terrible, but I feel like this has gone well.
No, this is great.
So I got a couple rapid fire questions for you, and because I think you and I have there's some kinship there. Don't overthink them. The same thing I would tell myself. Don't overthink them.
Okay.
All right, so here's the first one. What, in your opinion, is the Philly food? Like, what is that item? People say cheesesteaks. People say, oh, go to the Knicks. People will say pretzels, what have you. For you, what is your, like, when you think of Philadelphia, what is that food that comes to mind for you?
It's the cheesesteak, yeah. It has to be the cheesesteak.
Describe your cheesesteak, because there's some imitators out
I
here.
just had a cheesesteak last night, okay? There's a
So
certain
black.
amount of greasiness.
so last night.
Yes, like I needed you to feel this. There's a certain amount of greasiness to it. I was actually talking to you about this before we started recording. Just this, nobody makes cheesesteaks like Philly makes cheesesteaks. It's called a Philly cheesesteak for a reason. Not saying that the other cheesesteaks aren't good. They're just not the same thing.
It's not a chopped cheese, bro.
It's not a chopped cheese. And so there's just like my perfect cheesesteak has salt, pepper, ketchup, a little bit of mayo, fried onions, and yeah, that's it. Chef kiss.
So I'm going to run that back. You said something that felt very Baltimore, by the way.
Okay.
Salt, pepper, ketchup is definitely how we order things.
Yeah.
Okay. You've been around. There's through salt, pepper, ketchup. There's the Baltimore to Philly pipeline.
The diaspora working together here.
What is the book that you've read the most?
The most? Oh my goodness. I haven't read it in a very long time, but there's this book that, that's not what it's called. I don't remember the name of it. But, okay, so then I'll move on to my second book. I'm sorry.
You're good.
The second book is probably Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, because that's my one of my favorite authors. And there was just something about the language and the way it was written, you know, which is specifically, like, to bring forth and... like the language itself is like a character, you know, almost, and that's very much different than any other book that I've read. And so you really have to like fully immerse yourself in the reading, and kind of like just be there and be a part of it. So I've read that one a lot.
Let's see. Do you have a saying or personal like guiding principle or philosophy that you live by?
I have a lot of them.
Wow.
But one of them, I guess, that like kind of always comes back to me, and you know, cliches are so funny because you hear them as a kid and you're like, of course, you know, don't like look both ways before you cross the street, you know, something like very obvious, but certain things you have to experience to really understand like the nuance of the saying.
Sure.
I would say that this one that I've typically used with business and entrepreneurship is go as far as you can and then you'll be able to see further, you know, because there is so much unknown with running a business and being an entrepreneur, and especially like one that maybe feels like I had to do it all from the muscle, you know, because there aren't always a lot of resources out there, and the resources that are available are very slim. You just kind of like, you don't always have all the answers when you start something, so just do what you can with what you know, and then the more you do, the more you'll learn, and then you'll make better decisions once you get there.
That's great. Let's see. What would you do if you only could work for 1 hour a day?
Work like do something I don't want to do?
Like do something that definitely, like let's say the other 23 hours out of the day you had to sleep.
Oh, you're saying like what am I doing with the rest of the time?
Yeah, what are you doing with that
hour?
Yeah.
Oh, I am, and you said I can sleep, right?
Yeah, everything else is sleep.
Okay.
Yeah. So you got 1 hour.
So
What do you do with that? What do you do within that 1 hour? Like, how do you prioritize? I had someone answer me this the other day. It's like, I'm probably just planning out what the next day is going to be. Like, I'm just planning out, like, here's a checklist. Just working on checklists.
So I only get 1 hour to do whatever I want?
Yes.
I don't like this question.
A lot of people hate it, but it's like, look, you know, it's like, what do you prioritize?
Right, I like this other person's plan. Like, how am I escaping this evil hellscape that I've found myself in? Because 1 hour a day is just ridiculous. It's not the life that I want to live. I don't want that for anyone, you know, although I know that it's the reality for many, many, many people to not even have that much time to themselves. But yeah, I'm plotting.
Okay. This is the last one I got for you, and I've been trying to add more of this in there because, you know, I care about the people that come on. I'm not just here for the interview.
Okay.
I like to ask people like self-care oriented questions, and I remember they started up here actually. Started in Wreck Philly actually.
Oh, okay.
I was like, yo, what you have for breakfast today? It was like half a cigarette and a banana. I was like, yo. Or I had this theme of people saying that, I would ask, how many hours of sleep are you getting? And they would say, probably about 4 hours. It's like, you need more. I would turn into dad face. So for you, what is that one practice that you do with respect to self-care? Like, is there something you do? Is it a meditation? Is it going to your favorite coffee shop? Is it something that you're like, I'm doing this purely for me, and this is definitely serving my soul?
This is going to sound so bad, but
Greasy cheese sticks.
I know, like, that's the thing. You can't be eating those cheese sticks all the time, or you will be very, very uncomfortable, just in your skin. I just, at this big age of mine, I'm coming to the conclusion that I cannot escape this cycle of exercise. Like, I just have to do the thing. I have to be active. Especially, like, there was this, I don't know, I feel like once I graduated college, there was this big, like, push, like, get a desk job, do the desk job. But part of having a desk job and sitting all day means that, especially, like, when we were all working from home, if you had that, when a lot of people were working from home, it's that you have to remain active, and like, I literally feel like shit when I don't remain active, part of my language. So having just like getting on the treadmill, I hate exercising, but I love having exercised. Like, I love how I feel after I'm done.
I feel the same way. It's a good start to the day. You're like, everything that I dreamed about that sucked,
Right.
And yeah, like, as a person that, like, I was pretty active during that time, what have you, but I was like, I was a crazy person. And this you'll love this, because it has a Philly connection, pop culture Philly connection. So this is pretty much the end of the podcast, but I thought it would be funny to say this. So I used to hate Bradley Cooper, right? Like, irrationally, right? And so it was one year, I had tickets to a screening of A Star Is Born.
Okay.
And they gave us guitar picks, the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
And my girl looks at me, she's like, what's this contrarian spiral that you're in? You're here, his movie, he's singing, he's starring, directing, you got a guitar pick, and you're like, oh my God, are you crying that he's not? And I was like, look, man.
Who are you?
And so during the beginning of COVID, being out there and being active, I'm walking around in Baltimore. It's sweltering, right? Wearing the trash bag with the hoodie. She's like, why are you in Silver Linings Playbook right now? and she was like, you know what? You and your dad are him and Robert De Niro.
Oh my God.
So she was making those sorts of connections. I thought it was really, really funny and a good little story to share.
Hilarious. Yes, thank you for sharing.
So in these final moments, I want to thank you for coming onto this podcast. This has been a treat.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I want to offer the floor up to you. Shameless plug. Anything that you want to share in the final moments we have here? Where can he find you? Where can he check out Philadelphia Printworks? All of that good stuff. But the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me, for giving me space to talk about the things that I care about, and to give a little bit of background about Philadelphia Printworks. I have been doing this a long time, and I do typically like to stay behind the scenes. I'm not really one who likes to kind of be out there in front of cameras and stuff. So I just really am thankful and appreciative to be able to have this opportunity to talk about my values and my mission and why I do the things that I do. You can find out more about us at PhiladelphiaPrintworks.com. We're on all the social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok, all the good things. And just be kind to your neighbor.
And well, there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Maryam Pugh from Philadelphia Printworks, PPW, for coming on and sharing her story and the journey of growing out this business, this activism, this work. And I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, community, activism in and around your neck of the woods. You just have to look for it.